Hey, how's it going, guys? It's Wednesday, March 18th, and I just want to go over a few slides here. I'm actually just going to do two slides today. However, there is a lot of information on them, so we're just going to kind of bear with me here. I'm going to tell you a big story, and we'll pick up right where we left off. All right, so as far as today's lesson goes, we had ended last time, or I guess yesterday's lesson, which was Tuesday's lesson, talking about how Hitler is going to go from Germany down into Austria and then down into Czechoslovakia. Remember, he violates that agreement, the Munich Pact, which was an agreement between France, Britain, and Germany. The prime minister at the time was Neville Chamberlain of England, and he believes that he has appeased Hitler and he has forced Hitler to agree to something, and then 6 months later, Hitler violates the Munich Pact and attacks the rest of Czechoslovakia. So at this point, heading into 1939, Hitler has Germany, obviously. He has Austria, and now he has Czechoslovakia, the entire thing, including the western region, Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia, under his control. So now his next target is going to be Poland. Now, Poland lies to the east of Germany, all right? It actually sits nicely, Poland does, between the Soviet Union and Germany. So this is going to be an attractive place, Poland is. It'll be an attractive location for the Soviets as well, if they ever wanted to expand their interest also. So before anything ever happens as far as Poland is concerned, one very shocking thing happens in August of 1939, something that no leader in the world thought would ever be possible. The Soviets and the Nazis, right, led by Hitler and Stalin, are going to make an agreement. It's called the Nazi-Soviet Pact. This shouldn't be that difficult to remember, right? The Nazi, Germany, Soviet, Russia, Pact. All right, so you have Hitler and Stalin as the head of these nations. They are going to agree to a non-aggression pact, basically saying, listen, we won't attack each other, you won't attack us, and we won't attack you, and that's kind of how we'll worry about us moving forward. So Hitler and Stalin, two of the biggest personalities in the world at this time, and certainly two of the most dangerous men in the world, are going to agree to not attack each other. So that's a huge, huge agreement that's made, not just for the two of them, because now they don't have to worry about each other, but it's something that definitely is going to rattle the rest of the world. Now, what about Poland, right? Poland's sitting between the two of these major players in the world. Well, Hitler and Stalin, in this agreement, not only just agree they're not going to aggressively attack each other, but they also agreed to divide up Poland. So basically, if you split Poland in half, you are going to have the eastern side given to the Soviets and the western side given to the Germans. All right, let me show you what I mean here. Let me zoom in for you. All right, let me take this marker and see if we can do it this way. So let's try this real quick. All right, so here's Poland. Right, for the most part. I'm just going to do a rough outline here of the border of Poland. Okay, so there's Poland. And as you see here, it's split in half. And on this map, the black side is the Nazis, and the red side is the Soviets. So the Germans are going to start first. So Hitler takes the western part of Poland, and then shortly after that, Stalin will go in and he'll take, with the Soviets, the eastern part of Poland. Now, the question might be, well, what is Poland doing? Who's protecting Poland, right? Well, obviously, Britain and France are not happy that Hitler violated the Munich Pact, right? So they basically said enough is enough. As soon as Hitler invades whatever country is next, and it kind of looks like it's going to be Poland, then they will declare war on them because they do not want Hitler to just be gallivanting throughout Europe and nobody doing anything about it. So they said, Hitler, the next place you engage yourself in to try to take over, we are going to side with that country and declare war against you. Both of us are going to do that, Britain and France. All that comes to a boil and comes to a head in September of 1939. This is when World War II begins. Hitler will invade Poland and take the western part of Poland under his empire that he is creating. As soon as Hitler crosses into Poland, and he has this attack, it's called the Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg is a lightning war. That's what it means. It basically means by land and by air, the Nazis are going to do a total war style that we learned about total war back in the Civil War chapter in the first trimester. We talked about Sherman, right? Sherman had this total war style down in the South during the Civil War. It's kind of the same idea. It's the German side of it, though. It's called the Blitzkrieg, all right? And Blitzkrieg specifically translates to lightning war. All-out attacks, devastation, destroy everything in your way, and then invade and occupy that country. So that's what the Nazis do to Poland, right? They are going to, by land, with their air force, which is the Luftwaffe, is how you say it. The Luftwaffe is the air force for the Nazis. They're going to go in there and bomb railroad stations, communication lines, anything they possibly can get their sights on. And then they're going to go in and occupy Poland. And as soon as that happens, Britain and France are going to declare war on Germany. And 2 weeks later, as the agreement said, Stalin will go in from the east and take eastern Poland. All right, so now think about it this way. Hitler now has 4 countries under his control by September of 1939. He has Germany, he has Austria, he has Czechoslovakia, and now he has half of Poland, right? So you got to throw Poland in there too. Hitler's invasion of Poland is the beginning of World War II. And now World War II not only has begun, but Hitler has all this momentum moving forward now. So over the next few months, as you see on the bottom here, Hitler then goes into Denmark, into Norway, into the Netherlands, into Belgium. He goes into Luxembourg, and he also goes eventually into France. So France is going to be on his radar, obviously, and it's something that he definitely plans on going into Paris to take over. Now let's look at this map here on the bottom here. This is more or less what the Nazi map looks like for the most part. Now again, he eventually will get the Netherlands. He'll go into Belgium. Luxembourg eventually falls to him as well. Switzerland does remain neutral. We had talked about some of the natural boundaries that protect them with the Swiss Alps. He's not really trying to go in that southwestern direction. So that's something that definitely protects them in the grand scheme of things. Let me just use this marker again. He's going west. Right? He's not necessarily going this way. All right? He's not going in a downward motion. He's going more so just straight west. That's where Paris is. All right? Paris is right here. That's ultimately the goal for him. So not all of France falls to the Nazis. That's a common misconception that a lot of people have. Oh, France falls to the Nazis. Yes, they do, but not all of them. All right, as you see down here, the southern part of France is still going to maintain their sovereignty to a degree from the Nazis, but a majority of France does fall. As you see on here, Spain also is going to be a neutral country in World War II. Francisco Franco is the leader of Spain at that point, and people believe that he has, and he does, have very strong Nazi ties and sympathies. So Spain was a neutral country in hopes that maybe if the Nazis did fall eventually and Hitler needed a place to go and find refuge, Spain would be that place for him. So a lot of, really all of Spain does not get involved in this war at all, despite having Nazi sympathies. And obviously Switzerland is going to remain neutral as well. All right. So that's kind of like the map, how it's drawn out. And obviously France is now right in the middle of this engagement, and they're going to be right in the middle of this problem. So let's talk about France and how they're going to protect themselves. But unfortunately, it's not going to be so easy to do that. So the next slide is talking about Britain, right? So Britain obviously has a little bit of an advantage here. They have a very strong navy, and the Germans do not have really a navy. They have their U-boats, but they don't really have a formidable navy. They don't really have a naval presence as opposed to what the British have. But what the Germans do have is, like I said before, the Luftwaffe. That's their air force. I would argue that the Luftwaffe at the time was the most powerful air force in the world. Because of their technical advantages that they had, and certainly their mechanisms that they used for their inventions for the Air Force, the Luftwaffe was the most powerful. They had they had the fastest planes, the most powerful ammunition at the time that they were using in the early 1940s. So that's one thing the Germans did have at their advantage was their Air Force, but they didn't have much of a navy. So being that Britain is an island, right, the British Isles, they did at least have that protection. It would be difficult for the Nazis to land a large army or a large force on the mainland of Britain because typically you'd have to get them on ships to sail them across the English Channel, and that's where the British Navy will be. So it's one strategic advantage that Britain does have is being an island because it's going to be hard for Hitler to get his SS troops onto the mainland of England because of the English Navy. So Britain is going to send troops over to help France because France is now being inundated with Nazis to defend from them. But the Nazis are quickly taking power and overpowering a lot of the French and British forces that are there. Now, by May of 1914, you had about over 300,000 British and French soldiers that are now being cornered on the northern part of France. And this area is called Dunkirk. All right. Now, Dunkirk is located. It's a port. It's a city. It's a town. It's located in the northern part of France. And if you looked across the English Channel, which separates the northern part of France from England, there's about a 21-mile gap. All right, and that's what the English Channel really is. It's 21 miles of water that's separating France and Britain. So Britain is trying to do whatever they possibly can now that the British and the French troops are kind of cornered. They're trapped in the northern part of France, and they are very much so in need of being evacuated. But the problem is the Luftwaffe of the Germans are constantly bombarding not only just British naval ships, but also sites in Britain to affect the slow processing of withdrawing these troops from France and getting them to safety in Britain. So there comes a very, very strategic time period here. It happens in 3 days, from May 28th to May 30th. They are going to have, at the time, the largest evacuation in mankind is going to be Dunkirk at the time. All right, it was the largest naval evacuation from one place to another, and that was Dunkirk. From May 28th to May 30th, over 300,000 British and French soldiers are going to be evacuated from the northern part of France, going across the English Channel over to England for their relatively safety, if you will. Now, the problem is a lot of these British naval ships were so big and so powerful that they couldn't get so close to the shores of northern France because it was shallow water. So they called on some local vessels, about 800 to 1,200 local vessels, people like me and you, who, let's say they have a boat, a fishing boat, a private boat. You had people, some of those boats would be manned by naval officers, but a lot of the times it would be people like me and you getting into our boat to go to the northern part of France, which is enemy territory, obviously, because the Nazis are closing in, to just load up your boat with people, with soldiers of Britain and France to help and really save their lives, to get them out of that territory. So it's a pretty amazing story. A movie was made about it not too long ago. You may have seen it, but nevertheless, this evacuation to try to ultimately get these people to safety was one of the most astonishing feats that happened during World War II. All right, the rescue of the British and the French while they're basically being trapped and surrounded by the Germans, to get them on ships, to bring them over to safety in Britain, for the most part, is going to be something that becomes very, very historical. Unfortunately, not every single one of those soldiers were saved. There was plenty of them, like tens of thousands of them, let's say, that were still in enemy crosshairs, and they did unfortunately become occupied by the Germans. But about 338,000, to be precise, 338,000 British and French soldiers were saved during that evacuation in 3 days, from May 28th to May 30th, by the British Navy as well as the British citizens with boats. Unfortunately, 6 weeks later, France is going to surrender. So France does, again, most of France falls under Nazi occupation. So really the only place, because of this Nazi-Soviet pact that basically keeps Stalin out of the mix, the only place that Hitler really has left to worry about is Britain. Now, Britain is, again, an island, right? So Britain does stand alone, and it becomes known as the Battle of Britain. It happens during the summer into the fall of 1940. So actually from July to October, there is going to be constant bombardment with bombings, not only in Britain, but also the British Air Force. It's called the Royal Air Force, the RAF, the RAF, is going to be fighting against the Luftwaffe. Now, here's an interesting little fact for you. The Battle of Britain is the first ever solely air battle that ever happens in history. It's the first time ever where it is only an air assault. So you have the British Air Force, the Royal Air Force, against the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. And they are attacking each other and knocking each other down and bombing cities and bombing severe locations over the course of that July to October months of 1940. So Winston Churchill at this time, Neville Chamberlain steps down. He resigns as prime minister. He really was embarrassed once he paraded himself around, thanks to the Munich Pact, saying that, hey, we appeased Hitler, and then he goes on and just takes over all these other territories. Winston Churchill is going to become the prime minister, and he seems confident, right? He's in there, he's promoting this idea that he is somebody who is going to stand firm. He's not going to surrender to Hitler, despite Hitler's ongoing air assaults on Britain. What's going to end up happening here is the Royal Air Force actually bombs Berlin, the capital of Germany, and Hitler is extremely, extremely angry about that. So he orders, again, a blitzkrieg, an all-out attack, day and night, for weeks. And he did a lot of these attacks at night, which, as you can imagine putting yourself in that position, being a citizen living in London, and having these bombs flying over your head at night. I mean, there were times where people were sleeping in subways under the ground to protect themselves from the bombings over their heads, and then waking up the next morning and going to work It was an amazing time period, and something that Hitler really utilized all of his forces. Tens of thousands of people in London and in Britain overall were killed as a result of these air attacks. But Winston Churchill stayed firm. It was a controversial thing. A lot of people wanted him to just surrender, but he didn't do it. And he stayed firm, and Britain stayed strong. They did not surrender. And by the time Hitler decides to move on, he calls off the attacks. He's wasting ammunition. He's losing airplanes. He's losing fighter jets in the midst of these battles. And he says, you know what? Let's live on to fight another day. If Britain's not going to surrender, I'm just wasting my time. I could be doing something else. So it's almost as if Hitler gets bored. And here is the turning point, I would argue, in Hitler's movement on a lot of these places in Europe. All he had to do is just continuously bomb Britain in the hopes that eventually they would surrender, even though it looks like they weren't going to. If he stayed the course and eliminated Britain, who is by themselves now, right? Like the United States is neutral. We're not able to help anybody because of these neutrality acts that Congress passed. So Britain does not have an ally in America from a military standpoint. Britain's closest ally, which of course is France, they are under Nazi occupation. So there's not much they can do. So Britain really is by themselves. And Stalin with the Soviet Union, they have made an agreement with Hitler. They're not getting involved in the war, or at least attacking each other. So this is Britain by themselves against the never-ending, it seems like, momentum that Hitler has been building. Well, here is a big turning point for Hitler. Hitler decides in October of 1940 to call off the attacks on Britain. He's, like I said, he's wasting planes, he's wasting ammunition, he's wasting time. He could be doing other things. So here's a big mistake, if you ask me, on Hitler's case. Less than 2 years after the Nazi-Soviet pact was signed, saying that the Nazis and the Soviets were not going to attack each other, Hitler breaks that promise. We've seen him break several promises already. For instance, the Munich Pact, right? I'm not going to attack Czechoslovakia if you just give me the western part. And then 6 weeks later, he does it, right? Hitler breaks this pact. And he is going to violate the promise that he has with Stalin, and he's going to invade the Soviet Union. So now Stalin is going to be engaging in war with the Nazis, and now Stalin, of course, having a common enemy of the Nazis with Britain, Britain is now going to ally up with Stalin and the Soviet Union. So Britain goes from a country that's being battered in the air by the Luftwaffe, the Air Force of the Germans, and having nobody to help them, to now Hitler creating a bigger problem for himself, because now not only is Stalin and the Soviets going to be teaming up with Britain and giving them an ally, but now you have Britain on the western side of Germany and you have the Soviet Union on the eastern side of Germany. So not only are you making this harder for yourself if you're Hitler, but now you're being forced to fight a war on two fronts, the eastern and the western. We saw this during World War I. And there was an eastern front and a western front. That's what Hitler has now created for himself. So I would argue one of the biggest turning points, one of the biggest mistakes that Hitler makes is not finishing the job in Britain and staying the course and almost, again, getting bored and deciding, I'll come back to Britain eventually, let's go fight against the Soviets, and then violating that Nazi-Soviet pact. So this is something that definitely changes the course of history. It makes Hitler's job a lot more difficult, and obviously, we're going to see much more of a war now. Because Britain has an ally. And again, it's not like Winston Churchill was good friends with Stalin or was in favor of communism, but they both didn't like the Nazis. So they found a common enemy with each other, and therefore, by association, they are allies with each other. All right, so interestingly enough, Russia during World War I, you would think, would be a bad guy, right, being on the Axis or the Central Power side. They weren't. They were with us. They were on the Allied side until Vladimir Lenin took them out of the war. And now once again here, Stalin, Soviet Union, you would think, bad guy, bad guy. He is, but the Soviets are with us also. They're on the Allied side because we don't like the Nazis. So it's interesting, in both world wars, Russia, or now the Soviet Union, was an Allied power, which is interesting because you usually want to just associate Stalin with being an Axis power, right, the bad guys, but we kind of have a common enemy here, which forces us to be allies. All right, so this is Wednesday's lesson, right? So I'm going to have a worksheet attached to this if you haven't seen it already. Answer that worksheet, submit it to me by Thursday, right, because this is Wednesday's lesson. So you'll have tomorrow, which would be Thursday, to submit it to me. There's no conference for Wednesday. You're just going to watch these notes, submit the worksheet, and that's it. We will pick up with conferencing, however, on Thursday. Now, on Thursday, if you're watching this from first period, we are going to conference live for a class at 8:34, which is the time in which a regular scheduled day first period bell would ring at 8:34. So if you're in first period, be ready to go at 8:34 on Thursday. If you're in second period, our bell usually starts on a regular scheduled day at 9:16. So second period, you be ready to roll at 9:16. It's going to be a live class lesson. I'm going to have my notes just like this up on the screen, and you guys will have your notes in Notability split screened, and we're going to treat this as a normal class. All right, so that's what we're looking forward to moving forward. Nothing on Wednesday, right? Just for Wednesday, watch this video and make sure the worksheet is submitted to me by Thursday morning by the beginning of your class time. All right? All right, guys, happy St. Patrick's Day, which was yesterday, right? Which is Tuesday, but we're all Irish on St. Patrick's Day, so we might as well keep this thing rolling here. I'll see you guys. We'll talk Thursday. All right, if you have any questions, of course, just shoot me an email. See you guys later. Bye.